Okay, today we're going to begin a unit on tile games. So, if you've ever played Super Mario Brothers or a classic Zelda or pretty much most any classic video game, you've played a tile game. So, a tile system is a system where we divide the screen up not into pixels but tiles. We can allow our sprites to move only one tile at a time, or we can have our sprites move more fluidly in and out in partial tiles. So we'll look at that. We're going to do a study where we look at several different aspects of tile games and how we can implement them as we develop a pretty cool overhead zombie shooter game. But we're going to update by lessons and make a different folder each time, and we'll copy and paste our code into a new folder. That way you have an ability to kind of go back in time, and a lot of those different places are places where we could have jumped off and done something different. So I want you to make a folder in your wherever it is that you store your projects that you can use for our tile game. So, and we're just going to call it tile game, all one word. So the way I make a new folder is I can right click and select new folder, or I can choose one of the different options here that allows you to make a new folder right here. And then we'll just double click on that tile game, and we're going to make a new folder again, and we'll call this game, we'll call this lesson 1. And I'm avoiding spaces because I think that's just a good habit. So I'll call it lesson 01 so that it'll stay numbered because we're going to get up in the lesson 10, etc. Actually, I'm going to rename this though because I want to have my folder with a capital name just for these folders here. All right, we are now ready to begin our project. In our last project, we looked at a way of organizing. We had different modules for lots of different things, and we had classes within those modules for constants. That is actually really preferred in software development circles because it labels everything. But now that we've done that, we're going to look at a slightly different organizational scheme where we cut down on the typing a little bit, okay? But I'll show you where we, differentiate from there. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is let's start with making what's called a main module. So let's open up our Thorny IDE, and we're going to save this as main. We're going to start by working with two different modules. All right, so we're going to make our new module, and we're going to save it into our lesson 1 folder that we just created. So I had that under, let's see here, I think I had that under Pi Games. Yeah, so I've just created a new file, and it's going to be called main, just MAIN. Now, that's a very common practice that the file that you run to start your application is called main. So main is going to be our runnable. And I want you to make another folder, another module as well. So click on the new as well. We're going to have two things open. And I want you to call this one settings. And the module names, unlike our folders, should be lowercase. So we have main, and now we have settings. So settings is going to hold all our settings. Instead of making a class inside our main, that had our settings like we did before. We're going to have lots of settings by the time we're done. We're just going to put it all in one place. So let's take a look at some of the settings, and whenever we need to make them, we'll just enlarge them. So the first thing I want to put in my settings, I'll make a comment, is going to be my screen settings. And we'll start with one called tile size, which will be 32 pixels. So we're going to be making tiles that are 32 by 32. And we'll make something called screen width. And for this one, we'll just make it 32 tiles wide. And we'll make our screen height 20 tiles tall. Now we're going to make some colors. Remember, our colors are defined by RGB, and we can add some more colors as we go. But I want to use red, and these need to be tuples. So tuples are like lists, but they take up a little less room on the computer, and there's a little less you can do with them. They're kind of constants. But since we want blue to remain blue, this makes sense. Notice also how I'm using all capital letters. That is very typical for constants and settings, that we make them all caps so that we remind ourselves that these are settings that we don't want to change. And that's it for settings right now. So we'll just have to save that so that you don't have the little star next to it. Okay, so that's all the settings we're going to need right now. We'll come back periodically and add some more. So let's hop on over to our main module. And we're going to do a couple imports. We're going to import Pygame and settings. So Pygame is a module that was created for making games in Python, and settings is a module that we wrote ourselves. We're actually going to come back and change this in a minute, but I want you to see the differences in how we import. For our application, we're going to make a class. By using a class, it's going to really cut down on the amount of coding I have to do. It's going to allow me to pass information between modules and objects much easier. So classes are really powerful. We won't subclass anything, so we'll just leave it class application. We'll make our init. Okay, so I'll say self.screen equals pygame.display.setMode. And then we'll give it some parameters. If you make a Pygame, somewhere in that Pygame, you're going to see code pygame.display.setMode. So set mode sounds like you're just setting the mode of a display, and you are. But at the same time as that you're setting the mode, it's also returning a reference to the window of your game, which I called screen. Other people might call it window. We're going to make it a variable that we want to keep a reference to. That's why I use self. Okay. Next, we need to give it the settings for our width and height, and they need to be a tuple. And this is where I want to discuss how we import. So to access my screen width in my settings, I need to say the name of the module, and then I can say my constant, which was screen width, comma settings dot screen height. Now, this is actually very preferred in a lot of development circles because you can, especially when you're going to be importing lots of things like we will, it makes it very clear where these settings are located. If someone wants to change screen width and height, they know they need to go to the settings module to find it. But we're going to be the only developer of this game. And, if you're working as a game developer, you need to follow the recommendations of your company that you're working for. But if you're working by yourself, like we are, we get to make the decision. And we're gonna keep it to where we don't have to say settings dot every time. So we're going to change this. I want to make it to where I just have to say screen width and screen height. And the way I do that is I need to import all my settings, not just a setting module. So we'll go back up to the top, hit enter, and say from settings, import star. Now I don't have to put settings in front of. Okay, on the next line, we're going to make a variable that keeps track of whether or not our application is running. So we'll say self.running, and we'll set it to true. And we're going to set a caption for our game. So pygame.display.setCaption. And I'm going to call this tile game lesson 1. So that's it for our initializer right now. Next, we'll make a game loop. So the purpose of our game loop is to handle the repeated calls to refresh the screen and the events in our game. All right, now, as we go on, we'll do some what are called refactoring, and we'll move things around. But for now, let's just keep it like this. We're going to say while self.running, we're going to read each event for event in pygame.event.get. And the only event we're going to handle is event quit. So let's do a quick review of how pygame.event works. Everything the user does, from moving a mouse to pressing a button to pressing the X on the screen, everything the user does fires an event, which is stored in a list that Pygame keeps in the order that they occurred. I'm using a for each loop, and the word event will be every event that ever occurred since the last update of the screen, what we call a frame update. I'm simply asking if the type, so event is a class that has a type variable. If that type is a quit event, like clicking on the red X, then we'll quit the game. And we'll do that by saying self.running is false. Okay, now back inside of our while loop, but outside of the for loop. So I'll call this the event loop. We're going to call some additional functions. Self.screen.fill. And we're going to fill it with black. So that's going to fill the whole screen with black. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a tile grid. So we're just going to call a method that we haven't written yet called showTileGrid. And this is going to be so that we learn how tile games work. And we need to flip the display or else it won't show up. If you don't say pygame.display.flip, then any drawing you do won't appear on the screen. So let's take a second and look at what exactly I want the code showTileGrid to do. So we have a screen, and it's going to be based on tiles. So there's our screen, and what I want to do is draw the grid that we're using. So I'm going to loop all the way from the upper left-hand corner. So this upper left-hand corner is the point 0, 0. In other words, it's x equals 0, y equals 0. All the way to the bottom right corner, which is x equals our width and y equals our height. Remember that Pygame uses the tradition of 0, 0, x's get bigger to the right, y's get bigger down. What we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the x's first, and we're going to draw vertical lines at the width of each tile. And these vertical lines, we're going to use the pygame.draw feature, which is the same function that we use to make rectangles and ellipses. Well, we can also draw lines. So we're going to draw all those lines. Then we'll come back and we'll draw all of them going this way. And so it would be very inefficient of us to code each one of these one at a time. Instead, we're going to use a loop. All right, so let's see how we do that. Remember, we're calling show tile grid, so we better make sure that we write it. So def show tile grid, we'll define this, and I need self because it is a method in a class. And first, we'll loop through the x's. So I'm going to say, I'm going to move that up more to the top, for x in range. Oh, and when we do the x in range, first number is what we start at. We're going to start at 0. The second number is when we stop. Well, I want to stop when I reach the width of the screen, which remember we imported as a setting. Now I want to draw a line after every tile, so I want my x to increase by tile size. So the for x in range function, this is where you start. This is when you stop, and this is what you count by. So for us, we're going to start at 0, then 32, then 64, etc., until we get to the width of our screen, which was 32 times our tile size. All right, well, what are we going to do every time at x? Well, we're going to draw a vertical line. So we'll say pygame.draw module. And the pygame.draw module, if you want a rectangle, you say rect, but we're going to be drawing a line. There's also ellipse and other things. So the method, this function takes several things for arguments. The first argument is called the surface. So I can be drawing on an image, I can draw on a rectangle, or another surface is the screen itself. So we'll just draw on the screen. The next thing it takes is a color. Then it's going to take a start point and an end point. So watch as we do that and enter in each of those arguments. My surface is self.screen. My color is gray that we defined in settings. I want to start my line at the x coordinate. I want to start at some x coordinate, right? But I want my y coordinate to be 0 every time. So this is x comma 0, and I want it to go all the way down to x comma height, which I'll just say is h. So my first point, x comma 0, notice that it's a tuple. So yes, it needs to be a tuple. It can also be a 2D vector, which we'll talk about vectors in this a lot in this course. And then I need a tuple for my ending point, which is, again, the x, but comma the height. So I have x comma 0 to x comma screen height. So that's going to draw our lines that go up and down. Okay. Just to clean this up, I wanted to have those comments there for you to see that this is the surface, the color, the starting point, the ending point. But I'm going to go ahead and erase that now. And now we'll do the horizontal lines. So I'll be changing the y's as I make lines going this way. So the y's will move down. So I'll do y in range of 0 up to, but not including the screen height. So we won't draw a line at the very bottom. And we'll be moving by tile size. Oh, I've got a weird formatting, which makes me think I'm missing a parenthesis somewhere. And I am. There we go. Got to close that off. Okay. All right. So we'll say pygame.draw.line. self.screen, comma gray, 0, comma y. No, not, yeah, 0, comma y. That's correct, because I want to start at the x coordinate 0, but the y coordinate is whatever my y is. And I want to end at the x coordinate that is the width of the screen with the same y coordinate. Okay, and we'll close off that parenthesis. Okay, so that's it for show tile grid. We just need to make a main function to make this runnable. So we'll go ahead and get that done. Def main, which will create an instance of our application. Then we'll call the game loop. And we'll quit when needed. So if name equals main, we'll run our main. Okay, so now if we run this, we should have a black background, and hopefully you see our tiles drawn to our screen. They're in light gray, so I know they're not easy to see, but those tiles are how we're going to base our game logic. You can change this easily by changing your settings. So let me just close that. And when I press the close, by the way, that is what fires this pygame.quit. So feel free to play around with this. If we want to make our tiles bigger, I probably need to make my screen size smaller. So I might do 15 and 10 and run it. And we should see these tiles are bigger. If you can see that, the light gray is bigger. Okay, just a couple other things. One of the things that we can do is we can adjust the lines that we're drawing with an added optional parameter. So an optional parameter is the width. The default is width equals 1, but you can, whenever you do a draw command, you can add a width command to change it. And so I'll try width equals 4. Oh, and I've got the wrong version of Pygame. Okay, so I need to update my Pygame. With the older versions of Pygame, they didn't allow you to use width equals. You had to just say the number, which is fine. But I will update my Pygame. So you can see it's a little easier to see on the grid. But I'll go ahead and leave it off. I just wanted to discuss that optional parameter. And you can see that in the documentations here when they say that the width equals 1. That means I don't have to type in the width for my line. It's already there. But I do have an option of giving it a width as well. So very handy. All right, that's a good stopping place right now that we've learned we've set up our settings and our application. And we learned how to import our settings and how to draw a tile grid. So we'll stop there, and in the next lesson, we'll look at some commands.